Q.7 Provision of Article 17 of the Indian Constitution. 1. Conceptual Introduction. Article 17 of the Constitution of India represents one of the most powerful and revolutionary provisions within the framework of fundamental rights. It directly confronts one of the oldest social evils, untouchability, which had for centuries marginalized a large section of Indian society. Through this article, the Constitution abolishes untouchability and forbids its practice in any form, making its enforcement a punishable offense. It is both a moral and legal declaration that upholds human dignity, equality, and social justice, core ideals of the Indian Republic. 2. Exact constitutional provision, text of Article 17. Untouchability is abolished and its practice in any form is forbidden. The enforcement of any disability arising out of untouchability shall be an offense punishable in accordance with law. This succinct yet profound statement eradicated, in principle, a deeply entrenched system of social discrimination that denied basic human rights to certain communities traditionally regarded as untouchables or Dalits. 3. Nature and scope of Article 17. Article 17 applies absolutely and unconditionally. It does not depend on any enabling law. It is self-executory, meaning untouchability was abolished the very moment the Constitution came into force on 26 January 1950. Unlike some other rights, it imposes a direct constitutional prohibition on society as a whole, not just on the state. Thus, both private individuals and public institutions are bound by it. 4. Meaning of untouchability. The term untouchability is not defined in the Constitution, but the courts have interpreted it broadly. In State of Karnataka v. Appabalu Ingale, 1993, the Supreme Court held that untouchability does not refer to mere physical contact but includes any social discrimination or exclusion based on caste. It covers practices such as denial of temple entry, restrictions on drawing water from public wells, refusal of services, or segregation in public places. The word refers not to the literal act of touch but to the social stigma and systemic oppression rooted in caste hierarchy. 5. Objective and spirit of the provision. The purpose of Article 17 is not merely to remove an outward practice but to affirm the constitutional vision of equality and human dignity. It aims to create a society where individuals are not treated as inferior by birth and where traditional barriers of purity and pollution have no place. The framers, led by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, viewed this article as a moral rebirth of Indian society, replacing inherited injustice with constitutional morality. 6. Implementation through legislation. To enforce Article 17 effectively, Parliament enacted the Untouchability Offences Act, 1955, which was later strengthened and renamed as the Protection of Civil Rights (PCR) Act, 1976. This law provides for penalties and imprisonment for those who practice untouchability in any form. Under this Act, denial of access to public places, shops, hotels, or places of worship to any person on the ground of untouchability is a punishable offense. The enforcement of social, economic, or religious disabilities against any person belonging to the scheduled castes or any other marginalized group is prohibited. The Act imposes penalties for refusing to sell goods, render services, or permit entry based on untouchability. These legal measures ensure that Article 17 functions not merely as a moral statement but as an actionable right. 7. Relation to other constitutional provisions. Article 17 embodies the spirit of Article 14, right to equality, and Article 15, prohibition of discrimination. Together, they aim to create a social order based on justice, liberty, and fraternity as promised in the preamble. Furthermore, Article 35A empowers Parliament exclusively to make laws for enforcing this prohibition, ensuring uniformity across the country. 8. Judicial interpretation and enforcement. The judiciary has consistently treated untouchability as a violation not only of Article 17 but of the entire constitutional philosophy of equality. In People's Union for Democratic Rights v. Union of India, 1982, the court observed that the persistence of untouchability in any form is unconstitutional and intolerable. In State of Madhya Pradesh v. Ram Krishna Balotia, 1995, the Supreme Court emphasized that such offences threaten the unity and integrity of India by undermining human dignity. 9. Connection with social justice policies. Article 17 laid the moral foundation for subsequent affirmative action measures. The reservation policy for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in education, employment, and legislatures flows from the same constitutional commitment to end caste-based discrimination. Moreover, the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989 further strengthened legal protection by addressing violent crimes and humiliations inflicted on Dalits and Adivasis. 10. Broader social and ethical implications. Article 17 symbolizes India's transition from a hierarchical to a democratic order. It reaffirms that social equality is not merely a legal guarantee but a moral necessity for national integration. In practical terms, however, caste-based exclusion and violence persist, showing that constitutional ideals require continuous social effort. Therefore, the article's true significance lies not only in its words but in the ongoing struggle to realize its spirit through education, awareness, and reform. 11. Summary for quick understanding. Article 17 abolishes untouchability and makes its practice a punishable offense. It is absolute, self-executory, and applies to both state and private individuals. Enforced through the Protection of Civil Rights Act, 1976, and supported by other legal measures, it embodies the constitutional goal of equality and dignity. Though legally abolished, its social realization continues as part of India's democratic and moral journey. 12. Quick revision notes. Article 17 is equal to abolition of untouchability. Applies to all persons and institutions. Self-executory and absolute in nature. Implemented through the Protection of Civil Rights Act, 1976. Linked with Articles 14, 15, and 35. Aims to uphold equality, dignity, and fraternity. 13. One-line questions and answers for revision. 1. What does Article 17 of the Indian Constitution abolish? Untouchability. 2. Is Article 17 self-executory? Yes, it operates automatically. 3. Which law enforces Article 17? Protection of Civil Rights Act, 1976. 4. What punishment is prescribed for practicing untouchability? Imprisonment and fine as per law. 5. Does Article 17 apply to private acts? Yes, it binds both state and individuals. 6. Who is empowered to make laws under Article 17? Parliament under Article 35A. 7. Which case interpreted untouchability broadly? State of Karnataka v. Appa Balu Ingale, 1993. 8. What values does Article 17 uphold? Equality, dignity, and fraternity. 9. When did Article 17 come into effect? On 26 January 1950. 10. Which social evil does it target? Caste-based discrimination and exclusion. 14. Final connection. Article 17 is more than a constitutional provision, it is a moral revolution written into law. It signifies the triumph of human dignity over social oppression, equality over hierarchy, and democracy over caste. By abolishing untouchability, the Constitution not only corrected a historic wrong but also set the ethical foundation for an inclusive nation. Its enforcement continues to remind India that true freedom lies not merely in political independence but in the social emancipation of every individual. Q.8 Provisions given in Fundamental Rights for the Ideal of Socialism.